The 1911. With iron sights. We're talking about the quintessential classic competition shooters, let's say standby, right? Oh no.
Future is now, buddy. Ha! Yes, you get what you deserve. That's right.
Sorry about that. Welcome to Midway. Sometimes brass burns are a part of the show. My name is Henry Chan, and you just heard an incredibly feminine shriek with the burning of brass.
I am Josh, and we're from 9-Hole Reviews, and today, as much as Henry wants to talk about iron-sighted guns, we're talking about optics. But this is the perfect blend, Henry, because we're going to talk about the history and the development cycle of the red dot on handguns from basically inception until today. It's the perfect blend of your need to talk about history and logistics and development and my general love for performance shooting.
And this is actually, if you don't follow our channel, I am the former mill guy, and Josh is a competition shooter. So this is actually a topic that blends both of these, let's say, backgrounds of ours, and you see a lot of that on our channel. But the proliferation of red dots on pistols. Now, this is a topic of scorn to many people. I'd say I'm at the edge of this generation. I don't scorn it per se because I'm close enough to this generation to appreciate it. But those coming before me, you'll hear a lot of them say, these aren't reliable. For a defensive pistol, it's not useful. These are unproven, despite, we'll get into that.
Yep.
And so why though? Because I still remember back when I was a young boy and I grew up in an environment where you could not shoot firearms. I still remember reading books and reading magazines and seeing competitors all gravitating towards the iron-sighted 1911. Now, granted, they had serration cuts back then. That was a cool thing. They would put Novak sights on it. That was a cool thing. And so they would put fiber optics in the front. That was also a cool thing. And that helped a lot of competition shooters during the infancy time of USPSA IPSC, right? But gamers being gamers.
The gamer's gonna game, baby.
So how did the gamers start gaming the game?
Well, I think you have the development of the red dot, right? I think by aim point, right? In like the late 70s as like a hunting rifle style optic, right?
Right.
And this is eventually adopted and utilized by, it's probably the more popular place is by U.S. Special Operations, or at least we would know it as U.S. Special Operations through like the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. But competition shooters were also doing the same thing at the same time, except on pistols and not on the carry handles of their rifles.
Right.
So while this is a modern, raced out 2011 with a red dot sight, much smaller than what you would have seen at the time, the gamer open gun is where, as far as I know, as far as the research has told us, that's where you had the first red dots being applied to pistols, late 80s, early 90s. And these were literally like large body tube optics bolted into the frame of the gun. And that developed over like the 10 to 15 following years into the early 2000s and mid 2000s into probably the more popular one that we would both think of. Which is like the quintessential STI with the Seymour Railway. Still a frame-mounted optic.
Right. And so STI, for those unfamiliar, now that's what Staccato was before it was Staccato. And they were at the forefront of the gamer guns. And for those out wondering, open means you can do anything to your pistol, no restriction, and you can compete with it. So that gave the gamers a blank slate. You can do whatever you wanted just to improve. And that is really interesting because in the development of weapon systems for the US, you see a trend. And this goes back way, way long ago in the era of Camp Perry shooting. You'll see the competitors continually improve shooting systems, sighting systems, or the actual weapon systems. And then you'll see the military take that from the competition world and adopt it. And this is no different because back then, and this is not an STI, this is not a Seymour, but just imagine it if it were. what's the problem with this from a military employment perspective?
Well, you've got a durability risk.
How's it going to fit?
Because you have a gigantic optic hanging off the top of the gun, and you have a holster risk, a carry risk,
no sights,
battery logistics risk.
So many different things, and so as and we're fast forwarding really fast during this early time because there's a lot of technological development that had to catch up before it could mount onto the frame.
Yeah.
Outside of it being rugged, you had batteries. It was using giant batteries to run for a very short time. The diodes weren't developed to run for as long of a time as well. And fragility was a big problem. But the biggest thing on why this didn't turn into a duty pistol is because this is almost the size of like CZ Scorpion, the old school one. So you're talking about a really large frame and something that is really angular. There's not a lot. There's really difficult to fit into a traditional
plus, when you
holster.
add a frame-mounted optic, you make it very hard to holster the pistol because then you're dealing with this bulb on the side of the gun. So you have a difficulty putting it in a holster.
Yeah.
Basically.
So the complaints from the tactical side, from the military and law enforcement side, back then is warranted. This is impractical. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the interesting things that we'll talk about is the development of the RMR, and that bridges the doctor sight. Mm-hmm. And I still remember back in the day, Trijicon was one of the first companies to piggyback a doctor sight onto an ACOG. And what that means is you have a micro red dot on top of an ACOG. And the doctor sight is a European sight. Trijicon took it, and basically they recognized that the fixed 4X ACOG, the Advanced Combat Optic Gun Sight, was not the best employment to use a 4X optic in close quarters. Good observation, Trijicon. So they put a Trijicon, a doctor sight on top, but the problem with that came to fragility issues. And so the solution?
Yeah, so then you get the RMR, which is arguably, in my opinion, the probably the quintessential piece that allowed the proliferation of optics on handguns across a huge spectrum, right? Because suddenly you didn't have to, because of the durability of this specific product, you didn't have to mount the optic to the frame, and the optic could take the beating of cycling on the slide. Right. And so that was probably the turning point. This came out, I think, in 2009. And I remember then, almost immediately thereafter, within the next 24 months or so, starting to see these show up on custom milled slides. And back in the day, ATEI was the premier service, as I remember it. And this was back in the Magpul Dynamics era, Henry. That's when that was really hot, and frankly, that's where I learned to be able to shoot fast to a degree. I learned that you could shoot way faster than I thought you could shoot. And that's where I started to see that right when I first started getting into shooting. And those guys, I remember in the years right after the initial episodes, specifically Steve Fisher, had a video, and I think it's still on YouTube, of his ATE-eyed Glock, which had the milled RMR. And I remember that sort of becoming and even in the video, I think he says this is the gun setup of the future. And this is 15 years ago now, and it turns out he was very correct.
It's truthfully, guys, it's the guns of the future. This optic and other optic systems that are coming down the lines that we've seen and are being developed right now are going to be the future of law enforcement and military handguns.
And so now this is an interesting inflection of development history, because Josh is showing you this particular pistol. This is a Roland Special. It's Josh's recent acquisitions.
Yeah, I was really late to the game on this.
Yes, but this is an important development in the pistol, because this conveys the SF, Special Forces, Special Operations Forces, starting to pick up some of the cues on the development in civilian pistols. Now, remember what we talked about, that was a difficulty on the military using something like this with their kit. Obviously, this guarantees performance in a stressful situation, right? Which is something that your special operations forces would think of. If you're drawing your pistol, you're not in an ideal situation in combat. And so they're thinking about how can we put the most enablers into a pistol to guarantee performance in that particular moment. And so you're talking about primarily the Glock 19 as a base pistol. That was a recent development from SF going from the Yield 1911 45 caliber to 9mm, and mounting specifically the RMR on top of it. And I would say it solves a couple problems here. First of all, the bulk is gone. Second of all, ruggedize the ruggedized performance. And this one, yes, this one is co-witness. So it solves a lot of those complaints that people had back in the day and hesitations that they had about the mounting red dots onto pistols. Now, I distinctly remember when I was in Afghanistan in the 2012-13 timeframe, this was a really interesting mix of, let's say, the late Cold War era special forces operators, because they would, and shout out to Jeff Gerwich out there, they would be carrying the 1911 and 45, and then you would have the newer guys who would be carrying things like the Roland Special, and this all almost continued all the way to the very end days of the GWAT era, because as some of you may know, General Miller, the last ISAF commander, carried a pistol, a Glock 19, that was actually similar layout to this. Threaded barrel, Surefire X300 with an RMR on top. Now,
That's the fancy new RMR.
that's not what General Miller carried, but similar to this. So he dropped the comp. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the military found utility of this, and that was also the era of social media.
Yeah, that was where you started to see Instagram get off the ground and get big in the mid-teens, right? The mid-20 teens. And everybody started wanting like this configuration, right? This was all the hotness. This was all the hotness. So what's interesting though about this is that in that era, right, in the early 2012 to 2015, the front end of the 20 teens, is that you still had to send out your slides to be milled. There still had to be custom work done to the gun. And that brings us really to the final iteration, Henry, which is something like this.
Your new carry piece.
This is my carry gun, and it's basically from the factory, milled, and although this one is sort of like my own take on it, where I'm putting the parts that I want together, pretty much all of the major pistol manufacturers here in 2024, starting as early as like the mid-20 teens to late 20 teens, all basically started cutting their slides for an optic footprint, whether it was the RMR footprint or one of the many other sites, like this HoloSun site, that as we look over, again, that period of time, you have this massive proliferation of the guns being able to take it from the factory, to take an optic from the factory with a footprint model, and a proliferation of actual dots that could be used on the guns. Now, that's not to say that all of them are equally as good or as durable or as whatever, but that was one of the major development things that you saw at that time. It was a proliferation in the commercial market.
Yeah.
I think one of the first guns I remember coming from the factory with a cut and a footprint was the FN45 Tactical.
Yep.
That was one of the first ones I remember, and then you had many of the other manufacturers sort of following suit with the idea of basically, we're going to cut the slide for you. You'll have different plates that connect into the slide, and then you can mount your optic of choice from there.
You know what, this to me, this is almost akin to the development of the flat top AR-15 with the standard Picatinny top section of the AR-15, because you still remember, we started shooting at an era when carry handles were the classic. That is the standard
not
option.
just the classic, but the standard.
And you had to pay extra for a flat top back then.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the lines, the flat top became the standard. With the development of the M16A4 and the M4A1, civilian side actually caught back up to it. And I think one of the final things that tells me that optics on pistols are here to stay is seeing more and more law enforcement agencies, even the old school law enforcement agencies, giving the okay for their officers to use red dot sights on their pistols.
So when we talk about the development cycle, and this is a great way to wrap this out, I think you're spot on with this, but when we talk about development cycles, we say competition,
Right.
bleeds into special operations,
Right.
bleeds into more regular Army adoption, and commercial space adoption as
Right.
people want to emulate what special operations guys are doing, especially in the age of social media.
Correct.
And then the last bastion of replacement, cycling out, going over what the old SOPs might have been, in many cases because of liability reasons, whatever else,
Precisely.
law enforcement starts
Right.
doing it.
But why do we think that law enforcement is a big thing? Because you have police chiefs, you have their bureaucratic leadership who has to go through the risk management and thinking about, okay, what could go wrong? Is this rugged enough? What happens if an officer pulls this and there's a malfunction or they're unable to respond to the threat? Mm-hmm. They go through all of that, and the reward at this point far outweighs the risk of running what we started with.
Yeah.
And that, to me, or to us, is that point where we're realizing, you know what? We're here.
This is here.
This is it.
Yeah. And now the final sort of questions here become, are we in an era where these things are foolproof, bomb-proof, nothing can go wrong? And I would say we've absolutely not reached that era yet.
Right.
Right. I would say that there are still risks of running dots on handguns that are not completely worked out. The kinks are not solved for 100%. Mm-hmm. But, and I'll be honest, as somebody who's into performance shooting, you would have thought that I would have been on this from day one. I didn't get into sort of putting optics on handguns until very recently. And it was really the proliferation of the guns coming out to the commercial market where you didn't have to send stuff off to be milled or custom done that had me wanting to do this. But over that period of time, I've gone from, I like shooting iron sights on handguns. It's very familiar. It's very comfortable. I'm actually quite decent with it. Back when I was actually shooting competition and really practicing, I was like very right on the edge of low M with iron sights on production guns. So like quite capable with iron sights. I will not buy another gun now that doesn't have the ability to take an optic, just because of how much shooting we've done with them and the performance gains that I've seen on my ability to see what the sight is doing as I'm pressing the trigger and make, like, I think fine-tune adjustments almost like second hand as I'm shooting. And as I'm introducing new people to shooting, I find that they pick up shooting of the dot on the handgun way easier than irons, much like we probably also see with rifle optics.
Right. Now let's, if I were to make a case against it, which I'm not against red dots on pistols. Obviously, I also have red dots on pistols, but I have far more iron sights on pistols. I still find iron sights to be very enjoyable to shoot. I don't see anything wrong with enjoying shooting iron sights, but at the same time, we've got to come to terms that these red dots are being developed and matured enough to where they are reliable for a certain amount of duty. Now, if you are uncomfortable with that, there is always an option like, where was it rolling? Here, using suppressor height sights to co-witness
this
through
one too.
the RMR.
All of these have them.
Okay, so
all of these have suppressor height sights where I can see them. I still have not gone to the point of, I'll just shred the irons completely.
Right. And so that's a good point to this. Having redundancy is nice. It's nice. It's just, if you're looking at a risk mitigation factor, and pistols, if you end up using pistols, is at a situation to where you want to decrease as much risk to yourself, I think it's okay to have a redundant system. And in that sense, I would actually come back to say, having two different sources for sighting may be a good idea because you do have a redundant sighting system.
So there you guys go. That is the history and development of red dots and why we think they are absolutely 100% here to stay. I don't think that that's a hot take at this point. No. I think everybody would say that. But guys, we hope you've enjoyed tuning into this episode of Midway USA. And until next time, we'll see you on the range. See how aggressive I can get on the roll end here. Did that second one hit? No. That did.
Yeah. Nice. Now remember, this is 25.
That's
25.
30 today.
30, okay.
That's effectively shooting doubles. It's a C-zone, and I can't do it every single time.
Yeah.
But pretty close. I mean, it does make it stupid, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it stupid.
716 is Steel 96, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green. How copy, over?
Steel 96, this is 716, roger, over. 16, Steel 91, 1 pack, green, green, over. This is 716, roger, over. 16, Steel 92, 1 Victor, 2 packs, Redcon 1, over.